Welcome to Megacrossovers, and I'm going to allow my guest tonight to introduce himself first.
All right. Hello, I am GMBlackjack, better known as GM, or that insane guy who writes way too many words about too much stuff all the time.
And
I write songs
Wonder
with the
D.
Spheres. I write songs with the
No,
Spheres,
go
and League of
ahead.
Sweetie Bells, and other stories similar. The most recent one is Synthesis.
And I'm Wonder D, and I like interrupting people, obviously. I am a fanfic moderator, and I wrote the Three Chronicles, Ranger, and a few more fics, including Sunset Isekai, which is also a mega crossover, as you can see behind me.
Yeah. So, and as we found out yesterday, he's been writing fanfics for longer than I've been alive.
This is true. This is
very true.
I'm actually proud of this fact, so don't throw it in my face.
You should be proud of that fact.
I am.
Yeah. Anyway. So today's topic.
Today's topic is mega crossovers, but how about we kind of like start from the beginning? What is a crossover, GM? Please tell us, because we don't know. We don't know what a crossover is.
No one knows what a crossover is.
No one has heard of it.
We're all doomed. Anyway, a crossover is, in the terms of fanfic, where you take two IPs or franchises, bring them together, and tell a story about them. That is the most basic value. However, we're going to tell you what differentiates a good crossover from bad crossovers. So, the point of a crossover should be beyond telling a story. It should bring the two worlds together and treat them both well and create interest in both IPs together.
Yes, and it should highlight just enough about both to really showcase what is unique about each one, and it should be balanced enough to work and tell a story.
Yeah, which balance is very important.
Balance is the word of the day, basically. If we could have a drink for each time we say that, it's probably not
balance.
Balance.
This is just water. So.
All right, T. All right, cool.
All right. Anyway, so yeah.
So what makes a good crossover?
Well, beyond just, you need to be able to highlight what is important about both franchises. You need to be able to take the spirit of one, the spirit of other, and stay true to both of them while meshing them together. This can still work even if they're highly different. For instance, instead of using the pony reference, why don't we do the Animal Crossing and Doom stuff that's happened a lot recently?
Okay.
Yeah, that's. I think it's a good example because they're so harshly diametrically opposed to one another in the way they work. There's short, sweet, happy, slice of life, and death to everything.
So, like the first one is Doom, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. You know what you're doing. But when they're combined together, you see that both of their spirits are still kept. There's the weird, happy Isabel, and there's also the bloody murder everywhere. That is the essence of a good crossover. It tells you both stories while staying true to both of them at the same time. It's also weird when it's done well with such diametrically opposed ideas.
Fair enough. So, and then there's obviously the bad side of writing fanfic, crossovers. So, when you run into a crossover and you have literally no idea what's happening, who's there, people just throwing random names expecting you to understand everything, Papacha-sama appears and, you expect that people would naturally know who that is, right?
Yeah.
Because you know who that is, right?
Yeah. People expect... Sorry, I was on to talk. People expect when they read a crossover to be able to be told the other part is, because they're probably going to be more likely fans of one or the other, but not both. So you need to be able to write for both. So the explaining nothing problem, which is very common on film fiction, by the way, we just assume everyone knows what Twilight Sparkle is.
I'll be honest with you. I think that's true for any fan fiction site. Because we have them organized so that, if you do a random crossover, you expect everyone to know who all the characters are from there, and you don't worry about the other ones. But that also, this also emphasizes the fact that, if you don't actually start introducing those characters in a way that, or the topics in a way that people can relate to, you're basically limiting yourself to just that one specific fandom.
Yeah.
So it's in film fiction, it's fine that you don't expect people to know. You expect people to know who Twilight Sparkle is,
But if you're publishing anywhere else,
then you're doomed.
Yeah. That actually leads into the idea of the pacing. A pacing of a crossover needs to be done. If you have a lot, it needs to be long. If you have a short amount, it needs to be slow. But you need to make sure to introduce everything bit by bit so people don't become overwhelmed.
Now, bear in mind, guys, we're actually talking about good crossovers. If you're not wanting to write a good crossover, then, just go ahead and do whatever you want.
Do whatever you want. You can write for your own enjoyment all you want.
Right.
If you're attempting to write for others' enjoyment, this is what we're talking about.
And, speaking of pacing, one of the one of the things that people keep doing is, they're rehashing old ground, right? They try to do a follow-up of the series, like basically, Naruto wakes up, and there's a pony there. But instead of things changing from there on, is basically the pony's just like going on with Naruto along for the ride.
So basically, you want to go on your rant now, aren't you?
I don't know. Do I? Basically, I don't want to go on a rant about that, but let's just keep it short. If you're going to be doing a fan fiction in which you're basically just writing what happened again, but with another character that has no influence other than being there, that's not a good crossover idea. You're not adding anything of value to it.
Yeah, that's very important, because you're going to have to, if you want to keep both aspects of the crossover together, but you don't want to just rehash ground already tread. This is saying you can don't go through the episodes again unless you change them. Or there's also the idea of not simply telling the same story in a different way with the same themes. You have to have something new to bring to the table.
Yes. And another example of bad stories that happen to be crossovers. And again, this is not a general, this is not every single one of them, but this place is generally not a good way to write a crossover.
And because it's so oversaturated and overused, it makes any good chance less likely.
Pretty much. So having touched on that, how about we follow up into what actually a mega crossover is?
Ah, yes. Our actual topic for the day, the doom balloon of all crossovers. A mega crossover is a single story that contains several different characters and worlds from different games, stories, books, novels, movies, plays, manga, abstract dance, you name it. You just throw it. Dance. Yeah, interpretive dance probably, actually, is more likely. Yeah, so you can combine it all together and just create a massive story with so much stuff together that even the people who write it aren't always sure exactly how many IPs they've included in it. You should know. You should only attempt this if you fear nothing.
Yeah, you can't be afraid if you actually want to do a mega crossover. It is, I do suggest, though, that you at least have written something before.
Yes.
You attempt one of these things. And I don't mean exclusively other crossovers. I mean, at least a story or two, like get your hands dirty, figure out how pacing and balance works.
Listen to GM's word of warning. When I grew up, I always liked to stitch all of my maps together from all the fantasy books and try to combine everything together. And when I first discovered that fan fiction was a thing when I was like 10, the very first thing I tried to write was make a crossover. And this was the stupidest decision I've ever made in my life. It didn't work. I have burned the thing. It no longer exists. And I tried writing mega crossovers several times again until now, 2 years ago, I finally wrote the one that succeeded after having written a dozen other large stuff. You need to have experience to do it ahead of time. I'm just recommending that you get that experience from writing normal stuff and not trying to jump in your mega crossover like I did, and then suddenly suffering when it fails 4 times in a row. It's terrible.
So this brings us a little bit into why it's different than than just throwing all the characters in a blender, right? You can't. Let's be fair. There's people that do that just because they want to have fun, and that's fine. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to tell an actual story, that actually progresses, characters grow, characters change. There's a lot of things that you have to keep in mind. So we made a list and checked it twice, and crossed out everything that wasn't nice. And now we have this reduced a couple of important points. Correct?
So one thing I would say before starting, if you're just on a random obsession, don't jump into it. Give yourself like a few weeks or a month for the idea to gel, because early obsession burnout does happen. If you're like, oh, I just watched this and I want to put it here and here and here and here and put everything everywhere. Give yourself a few weeks before actually putting your pen to the paper.
And this is especially true with Megacrossovers. But if you're going to write just a normal little crossover that's, like just a few thousand words long, I don't think that's much.
Yeah.
Because you're just getting it out.
It's fine. It's
you're just getting it out of your system there.
And especially Megacrossovers. Ooh, you need to buckle down.
Yeah.
But so once you've buckled down.
Yeah, once you're calm enough to actually think about it, and you can actually develop a story in your mind for what's going to happen. Because remember, the plot bunny or a plot is not a story. That's just the idea that might move things forward, but it's not going to complete it. So once you actually have that story in mind, you have to keep focus on the story, which is a very tricky word for ESLs, because I have a friend that just couldn't pronounce focus. And it was he did that at a meeting in United Airlines. It was not fun. But anyway, that aside, focusing and concentrating on the theme of your story. Once you have something in mind that you want to explore, something that is the the cogs that keep things moving. Besides the characters, besides character growth.
Yeah. You need the central idea. Sometimes that's a plot, like the growth of a civilization, or sometimes it's the thematic idea, like for Songs of the Spheres, that was the exploration of what it means to be a story at all.
And in the case of Sunset Isekai, it's about exploring characters by dialogue, basically. Mm-hmm. So that brings me to one of my favorite things about these kind of crossovers, and it is surprising love constraints. Because what you would think of like a mega crossover, you would actually expect it to just be all over the place, right? There's people come in and it's there's no limits.
See, that's just an illusion we want you to think.
Exactly. It's you're still within the matrix.
Yeah. When we create mega crossovers, we often present to the reader as if anything is possible and everything. But in reality, behind the scenes, we have some limited rules we keep ourselves constrained by, which are very important to keep the story cohesive. You may not notice unless you're digging for it.
And it's actually going to help you a lot in the sense of keeping things, a little bit predictable in a way, because that helps in certain kinds of stories to build anticipation in your readers. But also it just gives you the chance to actually not lose track of everything. So for example, in the case of isekai, the main constraint is, it happens in a bar. Everything is, for the most part, in the bar, unless, you're visiting Zootopia, in which case, why not write something that's 6 parts long, right?
The rules can be bent, not broken. Don't break them.
Exactly.
For Songs of the Spheres, the limitations are less about the world itself, less about what you can do, and more about the philosophical limits. I have put absolute ban on there being true infinity, because that messes with a lot of the philosophy in the end of it. If everything is really in existence, then everything is true, and you can't tell a story about everything. You have to condense it somehow. So that was the limit in place. There's other limits too, but that was the big one that I have to keep telling everyone over and over, because they keep wanting to make the infinite power source.
So that brings us next then into, how those characters we're bringing together interact into this, theme, and exactly the cast. So naturally in a regular crossover, for the most part, with some exceptions, you're just going to have a relatively small cast of characters. So, example from my own works, Ranger is just 2 series. There's nothing else besides it, and it can get out of hand with the number of characters I have.
The number of characters is absurd.
Completely, especially for only 2 IPs, right?
You have a spreadsheet.
Yes, but let's face it, it's XCOM, so I need a lot of characters because eventually they're going to be gone. I'm not spam saving the whole thing. So how do you control your I know how I control mine. It's very easy for me because like each single episode of or chapter of either the Three Chronicles or Isekai is basically self-contained.
All right.
I'm not dragging a whole bunch of characters. But in your case, I think a little bit more relevant to this question.
Yeah. Okay. So for the ideas, there's a couple ways to do this. You always have a large cast, but you can change the focus from large focus to small focus. I mostly wrote in large focus in virtually everything where you have lots of characters everywhere, and that's complicated, so we'll get to that in a minute. But the small case version, which I think I did in Amber Ashes, is a little better. You choose a select few amount of characters in the crossover mess and just let them explore and go out and stay focused on them at all times. That can work, but it often keeps things from being connected and just keeps moving from one episode to the next. And it's useful for things like something isekai. I can't speak. Because they're just emotional interludes about characters interacting with one another. And it works really well because you focus mostly on Sunset. And there's a few characters around that stay, but mostly you just continue onward, small. In the case of the big cast, you have to do a lot more careful planning. Or at least keep things in mind. You're going to have to choose your real main characters, not necessarily a single protagonist, but sometimes a few that the action always focuses around. For instance, Songs of the Spheres has 4 of them. Then you have your supporting secondary characters, which you got to keep track who are around them. And beyond that, you sometimes, when you get too huge, you have to keep track of tertiary and quaternary characters as well, simply because you've gotten to hundreds upon hundreds of characters, and you need to always keep track of their levels of importance.
And now, beyond that, before we go into the next point, though, this is something that just is not limited to crossovers, right? Like, we did discuss a couple of examples. So for this happens in literature all the time, especially with large casts. You see it happen in the Lord of the Rings. They split up and they're all over the place now. Sometimes for detriment of story pacing, by the way.
Yeah.
Then in Dragonlance, you get like as the group got bigger, like they got split up, and then they're doing other stuff. Like you see it in the Avengers like comic books, Justice League comic books, Teen Titan comic books,
or even the movies.
And the movies, yeah.
Yeah. My favorite example of that is from like the Next Generation Star Trek movies. There's a large-ish cast, but some of them are more important than others. Data and Picard get their protagonist focus most of the time, and Dr. Crusher is usually relegated to the background. This isn't because she's hated or anything, but that's just because someone has to be put into the tertiary character slot there, and she's just in sickbay, doesn't do much. That's not bad. It's just you have to keep track of your characters and put some somewhere else in other ways. It's a balance. You can't have all of them be the focus. It's impossible. But when you have a large story, the focus can change over time. So your characters that are at the bottom in tertiary or quaternary or even secondary, they can shift up and down depending on where you are in the story. You can even choose to do a chapter in the point of view of someone else. The further away you get from your main characters, the more fungible it becomes. But you still have to keep it in your head. What's going on? Who's most important?
Spreadsheets are really good for that, though. Like keep track of where everything is going. So but the thing is, you do run the risk of getting into side story territory.
Yeah,
right?
Which side stories, yes. So side stories are helpful a lot for keeping your brain on track and giving the readers more stuff to look at. The danger of a side story is that you're tempted to keep referencing it in the main story over and over, and you really should make your main story to be read standalone. We have not succeeded at this.
And this is not something we have succeeded at. It is something that we're aware of. It's something that we're suggesting you do. So do as we say, not as we do.
Yeah.
But if you make the side story intrinsic to the progress of your main story, you're really trapping yourself there. And
readers do not like to click off the window.
I mean, sometimes, but it's the point is, if and this is I'm guilty of it. With Ranger, I can't progress the story that much without the side story working out, and that is entirely my fault because I did not really plan ahead on that, in a way appropriate to what I wanted to do.
Yeah. And other side stories, it's just, it got to the point where the one side story that was necessary to finish reading the story, by the time Songs of Sphere is complete, I added that side story back into the main story so you wouldn't have to click away. I was like, yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah, but
there's other side stories too. The smaller one I did called Amber Ashes is an example of it done properly and not a mess up. It's a story that serves as an introduction to the rest of the world. It stands on its own. It has its own themes that are mirrors of the main story, but different. And it can serve as an introduction if it needs to be. That works pretty well. The League of Sweetie Bells is a mess, but it's a delightful mess.
It is a fun mess.
Anyway, yeah.
So when you're limiting your cast, I guess we can. It becomes really important to actually understand, what the characters are about, right? Yeah. And what how to manage that. I think we actually covered a topic that we were going to do inadvertently, so I think we could just move into, power levels, I guess.
No. There's one important thing we have to do.
All right.
My number one rule for writing mega crossovers: assume your readers know nothing.
Okay.
Assume they know nothing. If you have a mega crossover, unlike the usual crossover where you can often figure out which one you can say that they're probably vaguely familiar with one of the IPs, mega crossovers will attract people from all sorts of things, including people who don't have any idea what ponies are. I have several of these people reading. It will attract them, so you have to, unlike usually, you have to be extra special attention to things that you're assuming everyone knows. What does Twilight Sparkle look like? You're going to have to describe that at least once, even in a few sentences. What is their deal? What is Equestria like?
It's a good writing exercise too, because you have to figure out how to describe the character to people that know her without being like
obnoxious
about it.
Yeah.
So and without going the lavender mare all the time. Lavender unicorn.
Lavender mare is usually referred to how you refer to the character without using their name.
Exactly.
So, which is just bad. Just use their name.
Exactly. Yes. And if you're describing her from the point of view of a regular normal character that is not like so color obsessed as Rarity,
purple.
They're not going to use they're going to use the most common word to describe it.
Purple.
She's purple. Even if, you can be more specific later on if you want. But
yeah. Point of view is fun, but we're not talking about point of view today.
Anyway. And another thing, since you're going to be introducing characters all over the place, if you're going to, introduce concepts from the worlds and stuff like that, you might want to limit how many mythology gags you want to throw in, right?
Yeah, because we're fanboys, nutcases. We want to insert references to everything, but when we like to make one-line gags that only people from the fandom would know, it in a mega crossover it debilitates some things. However, there is a way to do it. If you can make it funny to the people who know what it means, and interesting to people who don't know what it means, you've won them both. But avoid the desire to just keep throwing in gags over and over and over. Overdoing it will become a problem.
Yeah, like if they keep referencing a whole bunch of things from the series that is not really relevant to the story, you're not doing a good job there.
Like,
however, there are
everywhere.
Yeah, but there's also the spaghetti incidents, right?
Yeah.
And I have a lot of fun with fun with those because
that's the thing. You can do it if you can make it interesting for both parties. But if you just keep referencing muffins over and over or mocking Pinky in certain ways, you'd have to preload it with some explanation. That might ruin the fun. Or if you don't preload with explanation, you just confuse some readers. You got to keep in mind your entire audience, not just the main ones.
It's just weird. My head keeps getting deformed by the thing.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Your camera is like, I don't know what to do with the headset.
There's Twilight Sparkle and Rex.
Your particular interest is in power levels.
Yes, my I have an issue with power levels because whenever I read a crossover and people put too much emphasis on that, it just kind of like kills it for me in a way. Like if you have like Thor and Superman, on the same thing, like it becomes basically a competition about power, but that's not what the story is about. Unless that's literally what if you're writing like a who's stronger kind of thing.
If you're writing a shonen anime or a shonen anime mockery, just play it straight. Otherwise, we need to do some thinking.
Yeah, exactly. So we do have a few ways of doing it.
So how to deal with power level discrepancy? Superman versus
Batman.
Olimar. There we
go. Who?
Pikmin, Smash Bros.
Oh, that guy. All right.
Yeah, that guy.
All right. So I'll go first. My favorite way of doing it is just basically don't make the story about power. So if the character, if the characters that you're adding them just because they're super powered, there's no point in you adding them. They're not bringing anything to the table. You're just breaking the balance, and it just takes away from what should make, like, if a character's only aspect is that they're able to fly, why is that something that I'd be interested in reading?
Yeah, so
make it about something else.
If you can, make the story not about the power at all. However, those of us who write large adventure stories know this doesn't always work.
This is true, but again, just because you're writing a long adventure, super powerful thing, like say the Sweetie Chronicles, Sweetie is definitely not the most powerful character out there.
Yeah.
And if she were to get into a fight, it would be completely over her head a lot of the times. But it's not about that, right?
Yeah, it's not about that. Unless sometimes it does need to be in adventures, but often you can twist the story to get around it, and that's part of the creative fun, solving it like a puzzle. Now, some of the solutions to this puzzle are what I use and what I put down here. So beyond just having it not be about power, which often helps in the story and can bring things along, sometimes the power does matter. So there's a few ways to deal with this. The different universes have different physics solution is the weirdest one and some of the most fun. Suddenly you have no powers in this universe because you can't use magic or whatever. It provides a lot of opportunity to explore characterization there.
Mm.
Or it turns out that solving the problem.
It turns out that your ultimate power in your world is basically, a Monday thing here.
Yeah, Monday thing, or it just simply doesn't work. So yeah, it allows that to just change and alter things. But the other ways to do it are the ways you can borrow the hint from anime, just have the power level scale over time. That's often overly convenient, but sometimes if you can find a way to explain it or just not talk about it, you'll be fine. In Songs of the Spheres, it's explained by the whole meta nature of the entire multiverse, but we'll not get into that. The other thing is just have the story progress in a way that as they grow in power as it is, they are allowed to do more things. So you start out with a bunch of plucky explorers who have no idea what they're doing and are over their heads all the time, and they end up the wise old sages with the knowledge of the entire universe in their hands. If you can progress that slowly, that's a very satisfying arc to read. And it just makes sense that as they get stronger, or not necessarily stronger, but have seen more, that they encounter more things and know how to deal with them.
So how is that different from power escalation?
Okay, so power escalation involves, hey, we have to get more powers and fight larger things, and it's just convenient that the bad guys happen to not be stronger than us at this time or this place. That's power escalation. It's just the shonen anime direct. The growth over time is more about development of, well, I guess it's more like development, experience. And in the case of Songs of the Sphere, it's literally the slow creation of an entire society. They encounter things that are stronger than them a lot, and things that are weaker than them a lot. But as time progresses, you see that those things change over time. It's a subtle difference, but it is one. It's not power escalation because the bad guy is the same as he was always. It's just different this time.
Fair enough.
But Songs of the Spheres uses all these tricks at different times. So, yeah. And I would suggest if you're making a big crossover to mix it up from time to time.
All right, and this actually brings us a little bit into the next part because power levels and themes and such are things that are going to be conflicting from different IPs or stories. So both you and I, on when we're writing our Megacrossovers, we've actually crossed over with other fan fiction and we've worked with other authors.
And in the case of Songs of the Spheres, there wasn't any collaboration. Usually, very minimal. There was
I remember that.
There was some Sweetie, but there was some mention of the Sweetie Belle, but it was vague and such. But when we did the League of Sweetie Bells or the Sweetie Chronicles, suddenly the entire point was to collaborate with other authors, which is both really
that
good
is literally,
and it's provided yeses and oh no's.
Yeah, that's literally why I did the Sweet Chronicles. It was a learning experience.
Yeah, well, that's not why I did it, but it has been a learning experience.
I mean, it's not the only reason, but like, it's again, it was dedicated basically to fixing people that I admired. So, but working with them though is a trick of its own. So
working with other people in the Mega Crossover, it's both very rewarding and somewhat difficult. We're going to address first what you should do as someone who's running the show, who is the Mega Crossover host, as it were. So we'll start there, and then we'll go to what it is to be a guest.
Yeah, and then that's what to be a guest, yeah.
Honestly, might be more helpful for the rest of you.
Pretty much, yes.
Yeah. Anyway, as the host, you need to learn to say no.
And you also need to learn to take no's as an answer.
Yes, that's the thing. See, you need to be able to tell people what your world's stat limits are, and you can't let them just create the infinite abyss of all power.
And it is very important because you're going to have a lot of people sending you messages. If your story is doing well, you will get a whole bunch of people sending you messages asking if you can do X or Y story, or if you want to collaborate with them, etc., etc., etc.
That even works for this in general. If you're not collaborating at all, people will start realizing you're making a Mega Crossover and suggest, "Hey, you should watch this show and include it."
Exactly, and I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, but you do have to learn how to say no, because a lot of times that might not mesh with what you want to do. And again, when it comes when people actually ask you if you want to, write a story with their personal fan fiction, it's a little bit tricky because you have to, be able to tell them, this story doesn't really work for me.
Yeah.
And you have to also get it across that it has nothing to do with their particular skill, or that you think their story is bad. Because I mean, sometimes it is, but but a lot of times it's just well, I don't think I can bring anything to the table for this story.
For instance,
right now,
any romance played straight has basically no place in the League of Sweetie Bells.
But it does in Sunset Isekai.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's just that kind of situation. It's your story, it's your Mega Crossover, and you have to keep on with the theme and the balance that you have. Otherwise, it will destroy you and them.
So as the host, you must understand what the fic you're writing about. You can't just glean ideas from the eighth ether, like many people do with Nyx and Little Pip sometimes.
Pretty much, yeah, and. It's a sad thing because they just, or sometimes they just want to do like them as they were when they were cute, quote unquote, right?
Yeah.
But if I had tried to write the Past Tense episode with Penstroke and I had no idea of what was going on, it would have been kind of like, why is this even a story I want to add, right?
Yeah. You would have to understand the material simply for your sake and for their sake and for the sake of all your readers.
And I'm just going to point out though, if you want to suggest a story for someone to work with you and they have not read the story and the story is like over 100,000 words, chances are it's not going to happen.
Yeah. Or it'll go on the list, the very, very long list of things to read. Anyway, when you're the host and you want to invite someone, you have to have a clear idea where you want to go, or several clear ideas. So it's your crossover. You send them the invite most often. So if you're the host, you send them the invite, and you send that invite with what it means, what your crossover is, and at least one idea of where to go. If you receive a message from me, it will have several ideas.
Pretty much. And if you receive a message from me, it's probably going to be, what would you like to talk about?
Yeah. Usually I would suggest still having at least some idea, though. Like, maybe we could do Sense.
I mean, if you understand their material, though, you would have some ideas of what you're interested in adding to your own story.
Oh, yeah. So, and then that leads us to actually the most important part of including other authors for both the guest and the host.
Yeah.
Beware of values dissonance. Stories often have different themes at their core. Some will like to celebrate their strength and valor, and some will be always pacifism. And while it's okay to cross these over and see how they conflict, sometimes authors will conflict over what they want the chapter to say. And you need to avoid sacrificing the themes of your story as a whole for theirs. And that goes backwards too. But more importantly, as the host, you can't just let someone come in and present something that goes against what you've been setting up. This isn't a plot; it's a theme thing.
And again, this is important. This is why it's important to understand their material, because when you know their material, you sort of have an idea of what their characters and their situations are, about. So when you direct the story into where you want it to go, you're less likely to start a fight about like, well, my character is clearly so powerful enough to just solve this with,
Yeah, there is the power level of arguments too, but the biggest danger is the theme danger.
I think it goes kind of hand in hand, because it just escalates from there. It's like you have to have a clear idea of where you're going, or you're going to get into a fight over either the concepts, the themes, or like the characters.
Yeah. So be careful and pre-read and double check to make sure you're not going to get it and run into a wall.
Pretty much, yes.
Now, as a guest, here's the advice for you writers out there.
Let me start this one by saying, do not say yes to every dimwit that throws you an idea.
Yeah.
Because if you're working with your stories and stuff, and people just come out of the blue and go like, hey, let's collaborate together, and they have nothing of you're not familiar with their work. They don't have any stories written yet, or the ones that they have are bad. If you agree to work with them, you're just setting yourself up for disappointment, and probably them. You're not going to end up like in a workable relationship in the future either.
Yeah, be careful of who you work with. Generally, people who have at least a good story out there probably have some idea what they're doing. But if they got nothing, I don't risk it unless you real the person in real life or something.
Yeah, and also this doesn't mean that you can suggest ideas though. Like, cause I'm looking at the chat as well. I'm
not looking at the chat until it's question time.
Suggesting ideas, and this is relevant though. But suggesting ideas or stories doesn't mean that it's a bad thing to do. It's just this is as a guest and as the author. As the authors, it's our responsibility to be able to tell you, hey, this story is not going to work for me, or for this story. And as a guest, if someone is inviting you, it's your responsibility as well to just understand what they're about. It's always okay to ask more questions. Why do you want to do this? Why me? Why me? Why? So yes, so don't hesitate to send suggestions. It's not about that. It's about as a guest or as the author, once you're in this situation, what we suggest you do.
Yeah. And as the guest, two minor things, I suppose. Understand what you're getting into. Hopefully, they will have done that in the message they sent to you. But in the off chance they didn't, or I was unclear in my ramblings, which does happen, ask for clarifications what exactly the story means.
Yes.
And lastly,
it's unlikely that it's going to be that horrible, but sometimes you will have something that just does not work for you.
Ask me questions, please. Anyway, and also, as a guest, once you're on the project and already agreed to do it and stuff, don't be afraid to assert your ideas. Just as the host has to learn when to say no, the guest also doesn't have to be a pushover. You got to be able to argue at least a little bit for your ideas. But also, don't try to take control of the project. It's a balance.
Pretty much, yeah. It's okay to say, for example, my character would never do this. Please don't make them do this.
Yeah.
Versus, I'm just not going to do this because, I think it should go this way.
Stop trying to add infinity to my stories, guys.
Exactly. So it's like you can't, this is the kind of things that you should discuss before you start if possible, before you start the project.
Anyway, so last topic before we open for questions is my favorite. How do you world build in a mega crossover? Oh, this is fun. Okay, so there's two ways to do this. There is the one that just happens naturally over the course of a long fic. You've done this yourself already. Building interconnectivity over time.
Yes. I mean, like the basic example is in the Sweet Chronicles is like her learning of certain powers and taking them with her and like referencing. And in the case of Isekai is basically, look at the pictures. I have pictures of, like Twilight Sparkle and Rex having a drink. I have, and I will reference situations that happened before in other episodes or chapters without them really, that in the sense that they just contribute the part that they need for that specific thing.
And it progresses as over time, continuity is built.
Exactly. It just makes the whole thing bigger in the mind of the reader.
Songs of the Spheres lives and dies on this whole idea. Things will get built over time, and everything that's ever been mentioned will be mentioned later and be important. Because I don't have any sense of scale, as everyone knows.
But I have noticed that.
Yeah. The other way to do it is a lot more interesting. I like to call it lore synthesizing. And it's the entire basis of my newest story, Synthesis. The idea of lore synthesizing is you take two IPs, or more, as I have, and you realize that some has lore. For instance, Adventure Time has a long history for post-apocalypse. Like, that's interesting. MLP has a bunch of stories about the princesses and other things about them, and the sun and the moon and the pillars and stuff. And so what if you just said, okay, what if both of these are talking about the same world? And you try to work it together.
And that's why you cannot be afraid of anything when you write a crossover.
The lore synthesizing is very difficult because inherently they will contradict each other, and any long series will contradict itself. But you will also, once you find all these lore bits together, you can make some adjustments, make them all fit, change the timeline a bit, and eventually you've got a long timeline where you've got 7 worlds fused into one, where it's become its own new thing. And a lot of people do this just to have fun and ideas, like, oh, hey, guess what? The Doctor's everywhere, or Star Trek and Star Wars are secretly different parts of the same timeline. But no, it's just, you can make it so much more better than that by simply fusing the worlds together and creating something brand new. And that leads all the way back to where we started with, you got to bring something new to the table.
Very much.
Yeah.
So I think this would be a good place to open up for questions.
All right, we are actually, that was our topic. So
I am keeping an eye out on the Writing Stream audience channel.
I have now looked at it again. I have finally opened it. Hello, everyone.
Children's animation Numenera.
One of the franchises I used in Songs of Spheres a lot was Numenera. It was an RPG about Earth 1 billion years in the future.
Okay.
It's just a fun one. It's about super science fiction, science fantasy nonsense. It's a really good setting with a really good system, but I doubt it's unrelated. It's not as quite questions. Hi there, I see you twice.
Anyway,
questions.
So any questions? We're open for mega crossover questions. Feed us, yes.
We live off questions. We also live off comments. Please leave essays on our stories.
No.
Why 19? Because Stephen King, when he wrote The Dark Tower, used that as his amazing arc number, so I just stole it.
Does Wonder have a great editing team as GM? I used to. I think they just left the fandom at this point for the most part. I outlived them.
Yeah, we should put them in the questions channel.
Is there a questions channel?
Yeah, it's right below us.
Damn it. All right, let's see.
Yeah, I probably should go there to actually use the thing we're supposed to use. No one's in there yet, but they're talking now. All right, questions. People are typing.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, writing streaming questions, yes.
What was the hardest part of songs? So, I don't want to spoil any of it to anyone who hasn't read it, so I'm not going to answer the question.
I think he's asking.
Towards the ending, I made some decisions that a lot of people did not agree with. It resulted in flame wars over philosophy, which was the intention, but I didn't realize how bad they would get.
That happens a lot. Like when you have a crossover and there's a challenge to people's preconceptions of what they think should be happening, you end up with a whole bunch of arguments. It happens to me twice at least.
Right.
But he was very insistent, so that's why I'm blaming it.
Yeah, I'll answer that question for you later. I know it's a simple numbers thing.
All right.
Does time travel make harder? So much harder. You have to realize that the different crossovers use different rules for time travel. Setting up a system that adapts all of them is a nightmare.
I would say it completely depends on what you want. Like I think for lore synthesizing, as you said, that's probably a nightmare.
Yeah.
But for Sunset Isekai, it's like Monday, Tuesday,
Tuesday,
Friday.
Yeah.
The one thing I played around with that one is, sometimes she will go to a world where there's a legend about her having been there like centuries before.
Yeah, that's nice and that's cool.
But it's called kind of like a spaghetti. Like if you're using it as just as a reference, like a spaghetti incident, then it's not going to break or destroy your continuity.
All right, so balancing magic artifacts. Choose whatever you need for the story. Make them function, make them don't. It's your choice, really, as long as you're consistent.
Which one are you answering? Like the
action, okay. How do you balance magic artifacts that are rooted in one universe but accidentally have it effects in other universes? You just choose based on the story.
I mean, I think fan of most everything's question is actually interesting. How would you synthesize contradictory magic systems?
Okay, so how do I synthesize contradictory magic systems? Okay, so there are a few ways I've done this. One, make magic a nebulous thing that has different schools. That just each different school has different ways of doing it. Two, make magic have different types of magic, like magic A and magic B, white, black, blue, blackberry flavored. And otherwise, if you want to go real deep and try to synthesize things together, like I know you've done this for your thing, Fan, where you put the magic cards and the elements of harmony together with the types of magic on a big spreadsheet. That is fun and really interesting to do, but it takes a lot of work, as you probably know.
Go with the flow, bro. Go with the flow.
Someone's asking about favorite Megacrossovers that we didn't write.
Oh, man.
The only good one I've found that isn't the Sweetie Chronicles is something called the Grand Tour. And it is single-handedly responsible for Nanoha's inclusion in Songs of the Spheres in her prominent place, because it really shows her well.
You know what? I had read a few back in the day in FanfictionNet when it was kind of new. But like from back in the day, I don't know if anyone here was around, but like the bet was kind of crazy. It's kind of like, imagine it's sort of like, so you're familiar with chess Game of the Gods or whatever. Imagine something like that, like like something kind of like that in the sense that there's like an underlying, like the gods are actually playing their own humans, but everything is like Ranma like centric.
Oh yeah.
So like they do everything.
Like loops started there.
Everything. Yeah. What is the trickiest crossover either of you've done regarding conflicting themes, and how do you resolve those?
All right. Trickiest crossover. Okay, so I'm not going to answer that one. It wouldn't be very respectful for the person I worked with. So sorry.
I mean, like there's conflicting themes and how you resolve those.
Yeah.
I mean, like I think like as long as if we're not talking about like working with another author, right? Like I mean, I wrote a crossover called The Secret of Ukyo, which is a random effect, but it crossed over with The Secret of Nim, Stuart Little,
Nim.
And eventually Ratatouille.
Rats.
A lot of mice in there. And it was basically, like you find a way. I threw Ukyo into the what was it? The Spring of Drowned Mouse. So every time that she got like splashed with cold water, she would become a mouse.
All right, yeah.
And then you take away the martial arts and then you start doing stuff. But fun stuff.
So how long did it take you to plan each of the mega crossovers you've made? Songs of the Spheres took months. Synthesis took about a week. But synthesis just happened. It was there.
I mean, for me, I'm just rolling with it.
Yeah, he just goes.
I mean, it's a completely different thing. I mean, I plan ahead on a few stories that I wanted and like in movies and stuff that I wanted to add, but it's a little bit different for the type of mega crossover we're writing here, because I just needed basically a list of stuff. Like, oh, this would be an interesting topic to discuss, so let's just have it there. Versus, in your case, it's like, well, I have to do all of this.
I have to explain everything. Cake.
All right, so really quickly, the thing about the Hedge and Blue Blood and stuff like that, like about the Sweetie Chronicles, it's one of the beautiful things about that fanfic is that, yes, I have a lot of the Sweetie Chronicles planned from beginning to end, but like the really good thing about it is that each author actually brought their world alive with me. So every single chapter is written except for 2, maybe. They're all written with the original author, and that just makes that stuff shine. So the Hedge part is, the author was a changeling game master, so he really loved that setting from World of Darkness, so that's reflected there. Mm-hmm. And then the one for Blue Blood is with Captain Chrysalis, so that kind of like speaks for itself.
All right, so someone said something that was for me that was very specific, but I want to expand it. So, are there any fandoms you regret including later into the story? There are a few, but it leads to something I want to talk about because I added Voltron the week after I watched it, which was a mistake.
Oh, so like you broke your own rule about like not being.
No, this is what led to me making that rule.
Okay. Fair enough.
So suddenly there's this character, Pidge, who's now part of the main team, and I kind of don't know what to do with her. So she just hangs around. I do eventually find something to do with her and give her things to do, but she was there, she's introduced, and then really shouldn't have been in there, and I lost my interest. So it's a warning. I would do not just suddenly insert your most recent obsession into it. Not only do you plan, but if you're in the middle of something and you want to add something, give yourself a week to think about it. Or more. Don't just go forward and do it. Okay.
So we're at a 7-minute mark before we have to stop this. So real quick, let's see. Do you ever gamify real life experiences? Do you ever cross over fictional worlds with your imagination? I mean, I think we both have like probably made reference to stuff that we have direct experience with.
Yeah,
but I don't know if that would count as a crossover. Like if you're writing a story and you write characters in there or whatever, like I don't think it's not a crossover if you're like just reflecting real life in your personal real life in the story, right?
Yeah, the self-insert phenomenon I generally don't like, which is strange because as everyone who's read my story knows, I do have one in there, but he's a wimp.
I mean, and I think that's like the main issue with displaced fanfiction is that like people try to project like a lot of their real life things with like additional powers and kind of like this. I think that really kind of destroys the idea of the crossover.
In some cases where you're talking about meta stories, it becomes necessary to talk about who the author is. But I worked my absolute hardest to make myself a non-entity, even in the meta story, because it's just writing yourself as a character doesn't work very well. And when you try to do it well, it's really hard.
I tried that in the 90s once. And I had like an OC character that was like really projecting a lot of things in there. So I killed it. Like he's dead. And I made it work for the story though.
The Spears, the GM, the Uber GM is very dead. But there's another one who's kind of just a wimp. And there's another one. It's really weird and funny, but yeah, he's dead.
So let's see. Is there a danger that mega crossovers might put off readers who are worried about spoilers for properties they haven't seen yet? Do you have a way to deal with that, or do audiences just have to accept they'll probably run into lots of spoilers?
You will run into spoilers. In fact, I have a disclaimer on the big ones that say no spoilers for everything.
I mean, in my case, it's easier. I just like put up on the title what the actual it's up to season 5 or whatever.
Yeah, well, I actually see part of the fun things. Normally, I would do that, except in the most recent one, it's kind of fun to watch the readers try to piece together what's going on.
Yeah, but it's kind of like if you're using something that recently happened, like for example, I want to do a follow up of the She-Ra chapter, but if I do it right now when She-Ra just came out, a lot of people are going to be kind of upset with me if I don't want.
That's why Synthesis uses mostly older cartoons. The newest one it has is Infinity Train. Everything else is complete and run its course. because now there's going to be no more new information. It's good, hopefully. Mm. All right, so why did I use the Gary Stu as a villain? Because I wanted to explore the idea of Gary Stu's and what it actually means and how terrifying it is.